Magda Goebbels, the mother who murdered her own children. Imagine the final days of Nazi Germany, Berlin in flames, artillery pounding above ground and deep beneath the city. A bunker where reality has collapsed into fanaticism. And in the center of this nightmare stood one woman, Magda Goebbels. To the public, Magda was the model Nazi wife. Elegant, calm, always perfectly composed beside Joseph Goebbels. Many even called her the First Lady of the Third Reich. But behind that polished surface was a terrifying truth. Magda's loyalty to Hitler was stronger than her love for her own children. Inside the bunker, while generals argued and officers panicked, Magda made the most chilling decision a mother can make. Witnesses described her moving gently through the dimly lit rooms, brushing her children's hair, dressing them in clean nightclothes, all while carrying cyanide capsules in her pocket. Some of the children sensed something was wrong. One reportedly begged to leave the bunker. Another clung to Magda's arm, refusing to go to bed. But Magda remained disturbingly calm, almost serene, as if she believed she was protecting them from a world unworthy of their existence. When the moment came, she placed the poison in candy. A doctor assisted. The children, aged just 4 to 12, lay down on bunk beds, one by one. Minutes later, the room fell silent. Magda and Joseph followed soon after, ending their lives on the same day as Hitler. 6 small bodies were found neatly arranged, a haunting monument to what fanaticism can do to a human mind. But here's the question. Historians still debate today. Was Magda a victim trapped in a collapsing regime, or was she one of its most devoted believers? Her diaries and letters reveal a woman shaped by a childhood of instability, longing for belonging, and swept up by Hitler's promise of purpose. Her story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Some of the most terrifying acts in history were not committed out of hatred, but out of blind devotion. And if Magda's story shows the horrors of loyalty taken to the extreme, the next woman reveals something different: the tragedy of loving a man who controlled every aspect of her life. Eva Braun, married to Hitler for 40 hours. Eva Braun spent over a decade in Hitler's inner circle, yet most Germans never saw her face. She wasn't allowed at political events. She had no official title. She lived in the shadows, literally. And this makes her fate even more surreal. Eva met Hitler when she was 17. He was 40. From the beginning, everything about her life was controlled. She lived in a private wing at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain residence, surrounded by luxury and isolation at the same time. She loved dancing, movies, photography. But none of that mattered. Her job was to exist quietly near him. Historians still debate how much she understood about the Holocaust. She wasn't involved in politics. Hitler kept her away from state affairs. Yet she lived at the center of the regime. She saw the men who planned genocide, attended dinners with them, watched them celebrate victories. So how much did she know? And even if she knew, did she care? What we do know is that Eva tried twice to end her life, not because of guilt, but because she wanted attention from the one man who rarely gave it. Those suicide attempts only made Hitler tighten his grip. He refused to let her go, yet refused to acknowledge her publicly. But when the Reich finally collapsed, Eva made her choice. Several women fled Berlin in those last days. Eva refused. In a final note, she wrote that life had no meaning without Hitler. She went to the bunker, sat beside him, and waited. On April 29, 1945, while Soviet troops closed in, Eva put on a simple dress and married Hitler. The entire ceremony lasted just a few minutes. No guests, no music, no celebration. Just 2 signatures on a piece of paper in an underground tomb. 40 hours later, she bit into a cyanide capsule, sitting next to the man who had plunged the world into war. Their bodies were burned in the courtyard above the bunker. The woman who spent her life behind closed doors ended it in a place where no sunlight could reach. But her story leaves us with a disturbing question. Was Eva Braun a victim of a toxic relationship, or a silent witness to unimaginable crimes? And if Eva lived unseen in the shadows of the Reich, the next woman didn't just witness evil. She embraced it. Lena Heydrich, the widow of the Butcher of Prague. Most wives of Nazi leaders were distant from actual decision-making. Lena Heydrich was not. She encouraged her husband, Reinhard Heydrich, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, to join the SS. She supported his brutality, his ambition, and his rise to becoming one of the most feared men in Europe. People around them said the same thing. Lena understood Heydrich better than anyone, and she approved of everything he did. When Heydrich was assassinated in 1942 during Operation Anthropoid, Lena became a celebrated widow in the Nazi hierarchy. She lived in privilege, protected by the regime her husband helped shape. But after the war? Here's the unbelievable part. Lena escaped punishment. Despite being the wife of the Butcher of Prague, she was never convicted. She opened a guest house, raised her children, befriended former SS officers, and even wrote books defending her husband's actions. She lived out her life without regret, remorse, or consequences. And that leads to a chilling truth. Not everyone close to evil pays for it. Some simply walk away. But Lena's survival is only the beginning. The next woman stood even closer to power, directly beside the man who designed the machinery of genocide, and her fate was just as complicated. Margaret Himmler, living beside the architect of genocide. If Lena Heydrich lived untouched after the war, then Margaret Himmler lived something even stranger, a quiet life in the shadow of the man responsible for industrialized genocide. Margaret wasn't just Heinrich Himmler's wife. She shared his worldview long before he became the head of the SS. She believed in racial purity, discipline, German nationalism, all the ideas that would later evolve into the machinery of mass murder. The Himmler household looked like the perfect Nazi family. A large home. SS officers visiting regularly. Their daughter enrolled in an SS kindergarten where children sang songs about loyalty to Hitler. Everything about their life was engineered to represent the superior German family. But here's the detail many people miss. Margaret wasn't a passive housewife. She was an active participant. She joined the Nazi Women's League. She served in the German Red Cross. She visited concentration camps, officially as part of her role. She saw the prisoners. She read camp reports. She knew the system her husband built. So why wasn't she punished after 1945? When the war ended, Margaret was arrested by the Allies. She was interrogated repeatedly, questioned about the camps, about Himmler, about her activities. But legally, very little could be proven. Most documentation focused on Himmler himself, not her. Without hard evidence of direct involvement, she was released. Just like that. While other Nazi figures' wives faced prison, exile, or public hatred, Margaret simply stepped into a quiet, unnoticed life. She never denounced Himmler, never rejected the ideology. She remained, until her death, a believer in the regime her husband died to protect. And her story leaves us with a disturbing observation. Sometimes the legal system can determine guilt, but morality tells a very different story. But if Margaret's life shows how someone can escape justice, the next woman's fate reveals the exact opposite. A life consumed by waiting, loneliness, and the slow collapse of everything she believed in. Ilse Hess, 40 years of waiting. Ilse Hess didn't lose her husband to execution. She lost him to a cell for 40 long years. Her husband, Rudolf Hess, was Hitler's deputy Führer, one of the highest-ranking Nazis. But in 1941, in one of the strangest moves in wartime history, he flew alone to Scotland on a self-designed peace mission. When he landed, he was immediately arrested. Hitler claimed Hess had gone insane. Britain treated him as an enemy prisoner. And from that day on, Ilse Hess was alone. After the war, Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment in Spandau prison, and Ilse's life became defined by a single mission: to get her husband released. She wrote hundreds of letters to foreign governments. She appealed to diplomats and human rights organizations. She tried to gain public sympathy, and failed every time. The Allies rejected every request. Hess was too symbolic, too high-ranking, too directly tied to Hitler to ever be freed. Meanwhile, Ilse lived under surveillance. She lost her social status, her financial stability, and eventually her emotional support network. She aged, year after year, with nothing to hold on to except the hope that one day the gate at Spandau would open. It never did. Rudolf Hess died in prison in 1987, the last remaining Nazi inmate. Ilse died 15 years later, still loyal to a man who had served the darkest regime of the 20th century. Her story isn't about violence or complicity. It's about the psychological cost of devotion to someone the world refused to forgive. And if Ilse spent decades trapped in loneliness, the next woman experienced something else entirely. A life erased, dissolved into shadows, where even her name couldn't survive. Gerda Bormann, the woman who vanished. Gerda Bormann's husband, Martin Bormann, was Hitler's private secretary, a man who controlled access to Hitler, influenced major decisions, and held enormous unseen power. If Hitler was the face of the regime, Bormann was the ghost behind the throne. But after the war, Bormann disappeared. Rumors spread everywhere. He escaped to South America. He lived under a new identity. He hid inside monasteries. For years, no one knew the truth. And Gerda? She was left behind in a world collapsing around her. With her husband gone, Gerda became a target for interrogations, surveillance, and public suspicion. Unlike Lena Heydrich, she had no protection. Unlike Margaret Himmler, she had no network. She had only her children, fear, and the constant pressure of being the wife of one of Hitler's closest men. So she did the only thing she could. She vanished. Gerda changed her name, moved between safe houses, lived under false identities. Cut all ties with the past. Imagine living every day wondering, is someone following me? Does my neighbor know who I am? Will I be arrested tomorrow? This wasn't a year of hiding. It wasn't 5. It was the rest of her life. Gerda eventually died in obscurity, haunted by secrets she could not escape. She never learned definitively what happened to her husband. She never regained a sense of home. Her story shows that proximity to evil doesn't always lead to punishment. Sometimes it leads to a lifetime of running. But while Gerda faded into the shadows, the next woman lived in the spotlight, until everything she had was taken from her in an instant. Emmy Goring, from royalty to ruin. Emmy Goring lived like a queen, literally. As the wife of Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and one of the most powerful Nazi leaders, she presided over lavish parties at Carenhall, a colossal estate filled with stolen art, trophies, and luxury on an almost unbelievable scale. Foreign diplomats, celebrities, high-ranking officers, everyone passed through Carenhall's doors. Emmy loved the attention, the admiration, the glamour of being the First Lady of the Luftwaffe. But when the Reich fell, it all disappeared overnight. Göring was arrested and put on trial at Nuremberg. Carenhall was destroyed. The family fortune was seized. Emmy went from dining with world leaders to standing in ration lines with ordinary Germans. People spat at her in the streets. Shops refused to serve her. Her name became a curse. She and her daughter lived in poverty. A shocking fall from grace for a woman who once had servants attending to her every need. And yet, despite losing everything, she never fully condemned her past. She remained loyal to her husband's memory, even as the world turned its back on her. Emmy's story is a reminder that the collapse of power can be just as brutal as any legal sentence. But the next woman? Her fate is different, quieter, stranger, and almost forgotten by history. Henriette von Schirach, a rare voice of remorse. Henriette von Schirach had every reason to stay silent. She was the wife of Baldur von Schirach, the leader of the Hitler Youth, a man directly responsible for indoctrinating millions of German children and deporting tens of thousands of Jews from Vienna. During the war, Henriette lived in privilege. She attended Hitler's private dinners. She vacationed at the Berghof. She was part of the Nazi elite, surrounded by luxury, power, and influence. But unlike the other wives, something changed in her. In 1943, Henriette witnessed Jews in Amsterdam being deported. Mothers crying, children screaming, families torn apart. Something inside her broke. She confronted Hitler personally, an act nearly unthinkable for anyone in his inner circle, let alone a woman. She told him the deportations were inhumane. Hitler exploded in rage. She and her husband were banished from his inner circle. This was the moment her loyalty snapped. After the war, Baldur was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Henriette could have defended him like the other wives did. She could have denied everything. Instead, she did the opposite. She wrote openly about the crimes of the regime. She criticized Hitler. She expressed genuine remorse, not excuses, not vague regret, but a direct acknowledgement of guilt. And while her honesty didn't erase the past, it stands out because almost no one else admitted anything, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Henriette spent the rest of her life writing, teaching, and warning younger generations about the dangers of blind ideology. Her story leaves us with one of the script's most important questions. If more people inside the regime had spoken out, even a little, how different could history have been? Some of these women were guilty, some were trapped, and others tried to disappear. But none of them escaped the shadow of the men they once stood beside. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment so we can bring you more powerful history stories.